back. Welcome to Abstractable. I'm Ryan and with me is Lockie. The Abstractable Podcast is for the entrepreneurial spirited amongst us and is a journey of us trying to dissect some of our favourite thinkers' ideas. Today we talk about the book American Kingpin by Nick Bilton.
And what do we discuss? Well, we discuss how Ross Ulbricht created one of the world's biggest drug empires within 2 years, only armed with a laptop. We talk about how the police worked together to catch this kingpin, and multiple different agencies within the American government had to come together just to find this guy. And we also talk about the transformation of Ross from a mild-mannered college kid to the dread pirate Roberts, his alter ego. And why? Well, because it's a bloody interesting story. That's why. It's really one of the most fun books we've read in a long time. And it also talks about one of the most unique and amazing true crime stories of our lifetimes. To find out more, well, you can find Nick Bilton on Twitter at Nick Bilton, and he's also a writer for the New York Times and Vanity Fair, and has written 2 other books, Hatching Twitter and I Live in the Future, Here's How It Works. So, don't forget, you can find full video from episodes on YouTube or check out our show notes, including other books we mention and stuff from every episode on our website at abstractable.co. Lastly, if you enjoyed listening, well, we encourage you to buy the book and give it a read or a listen if you listen to audiobooks on Audible. And if you like the show, it'd mean a lot to us if you shared it with someone else. We hope you enjoy the episode.
I think there's a bit of dust actually in the eye.
Right. I'm recording, so
yeah.
All yours.
I'm already live, mate. We're already in.
What?
We're in the mix.
Are we? Okay.
We're in.
Oh, glad you told me. What if I'd said something?
Well, that's what we're all about, mate. Openness and transparency.
Raw honesty. That's good.
I've been reading a pretty honest book of late. Actually, not reading, listening to in this case. Shoe Dog. The story about Nike.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm going to re-listen before we record because I listened to it a few years ago and I loved it. I thought it was awesome. Doesn't it make you want to go for a run?
It does. Funnily enough, when I first started listening to it, I wanted to go for a run. And so much so that I went for a run.
It takes a lot to get me into more than a walk, so it must be inspirational.
It's a motivational book, and so it portrays the good character in the business world. You know, well, he seems like a good guy. You know, he seems quite honest. He seems pretty straightforward. It sounds like he gets quite corporate towards the end, but he sounds like a good guy. Whereas
he just kind of gave it a go, didn't he? Like,
he did.
It's a pretty, from his account, loose sort of operation for maybe 20 years, I reckon.
Yeah. This is the dawning of Nike. Very loose. Yeah. Although let's not give too much away this episode, mate. Let's save it. And we've got someone less good to talk about today, which is that segue that you kept interrupting me on.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm trying to have a conversation. Apologies for that. So what are we talking about? There's a segue.
We are talking about the Silk Road, or the actual book name is American Kingpin. But it's about the building of what was known as the Silk Road. Which was a black market, online black marketplace, where you could effectively buy and sell whatever you wanted. Was the founding philosophy for the.
Did you know anyone that used this service?
That used the black market?
Obviously, no names, but.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised if I did.
Was it around? Did you hear about it talked about?
Well, it was definitely spoken about a lot back. What was it? Probably 20 2012-ish, somewhere around there.
Ish,
I think somewhere 2011, 2013, I think was the period for the Silk Road. And so I definitely think that it was the topic of news for sure, because it was almost like a daily report on what the Silk Road is doing from news reports, because you need to be able to milk as much as you can out of a story. But there was also some pretty sad stories, particularly for some Australian high schoolers. I think was a really big case news case that came out of the back of the Silk Road. But we might touch on that. We might touch on that later.
Yeah. Maybe we don't dive too far into it, but yeah, I certainly heard it getting bandied around, and someone told me about it, and they said, "Oh, you pay with this thing called Bitcoin." And I was like, "What the hell's that?" And they're like, "Oh, it's this virtual currency." I said, "Oh, whatever." And then I actually got a bit interested in it and started to look at it back then. And one of the people who told me about this said, "Oh, I bought 3 of them."
Bought 3 Bitcoins.
Yeah, they're $100 back then.
Oh, what are they worth now, mate?
15 grand or something. So it's a pretty good return on equity, return on investment. So yeah, I wish I'd kind of purchased some Bitcoin when I heard about it, but doesn't everyone say that? So.
Yeah, it's the what ifs, hey?
Indeed. So without getting too far ahead about ourselves, it's kind of this book's kind of a story about one man's creation of this with a bunch of with a bit of assistance, and how this kind of idea grew into this incredible business, really.
Yeah.
Not incredible necessarily, not necessarily a source for good, but an incredible business.
You can do like amazing things, but amazing doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing.
Especially not when you give it these ones.
Yeah. What is it? What do we call them?
Great day today.
Yeah.
The air quotes. Yeah.
Yeah, the air quotes. So, no, but what was able to be achieved is actually quite incredible.
Yeah.
When you think about it, and when you look at kind of the operations and what was involved. So, how about we start off with the man himself, though? So Ross Ulbricht. So he's now, 36 years old. So he's born in 1984, and he is the man, and he's the. Do you call him the protagonist in this story? I think he's still the protagonist.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
I would.
Yeah, he's the good guy in the story, although he's not necessarily a good guy out in the world, and particularly what he's up to at the moment.
No spoilers.
So Ross was he was a Boy Scout when he was growing up. He grew up in Austin. He graduated with a Bachelor of Physics in 2006, and then went on to Penn State University after he'd graduated, from a physics degree, into materials science and engineering, specifically crystallography. He had a pretty like niche interest, and by the sounds of all of that, he was also very clever.
Oh yeah, I think he has to be a very smart guy for sure.
Yeah.
After you've read this, a very idealistic person too. I would say that he had a very strong streak about finding what was good in the world, or what he thought, his values were.
Yeah. Well, I think he was brought up. So he's brought up in his family. I think his family's relatively libertarian in their views. And so when he was at uni doing his master's in particular, his affiliation with libertarianism intensified. And he joined the libertarian clubs, and which meant that he went into all the debates and things, debates against Democrats, debates against Republicans. And by the sounds in the book, the way they portrayed it, he would win all these debates.
So what is a libertarian?
Yeah, well, we have a slightly we don't follow the same party structure in Australia, but they're the ones that look at economic non-interventionalism. So, basically, the free market is what that means to a degree, and let every man and his dog do as they wish. It's like, for the individual. It's very much a for the individual perspective.
It reminds me of our lessons from history episode where he says that the well-off always shoot for freedom, right? So I think it's there's a lot of billionaires that like this idea.
Yes. Mind you, at the time, he was very much not in that kind of space of person. It sounded like he didn't have any money at all whatsoever.
No, it didn't seem like he cared that much about money either from his living conditions and this sort of, although his family seemed to be like a nice family, just this kind of normal upbringing. As far as, like you could read from the book, I thought.
Yeah, he specifically, mate, he followed this guy named Ludwig von Mises' philosophy on libertarianism, which has that individualism element, but also has like an anti-imperialist element where it's like, not going to take over, just kind of keep things within the country or keep things within the, whatever it is. And what we kind of find out is this is very much, or at least I certainly think this is probably the most critical influence on his entire life that ensued.
Yeah, he certainly wanted libertarianism as a cause for good, I thought. He thought it would lead to a better society.
Correct. He was very like altruistic in his perspective. Like he just wanted to make a big difference. And it was always with a perspective that he's going to like contribute something big to the world. So nothing but good intentions, but that's how it all starts.
This is this is a massive part of this story, is just how this eventuated from this person,
Yeah. Have you seen what he looks like?
Yeah, it's surprising.
It is very surprising.
Don't you think? What struck you? Like,
he looks like, I don't want to spoil the book, and maybe we get back onto it later on. But basically he does not fit he does not personify the person that he ends up becoming, or that he's perceived to be. By the time he's well and truly in the mix, he's as I mentioned earlier, he's like, he was a Boy Scout when he was growing up. He's quite, keeps to himself to a great degree. He's a physicist, and you kind of start to paint a picture. I think he's, redheaded. I think he's quite skinny, and it doesn't quite mesh together what that is, and then what becomes. So he never wanted to get into regular work. So much so that I think he had one like part-time job during his time at university that he basically got fired for because he didn't show up or didn't do the job properly. Okay. I can't quite recall. But he very much had like the entrepreneurial spirit in him. And I think he was always wanting to move beyond that, that tracked, I use air quotes again, that tracked life of, jumping into for him, it was going to be academia, because he jumped into a physics PhD after completing his master's and quit that, and then moved into some day trading stuff, and, discovering he wasn't making any money. I think he's tried to start an investment fund and that didn't go so well. Then he started to make a video game, and the video game was all centered around this libertarian view again. But it was creating like a seasteaded society.
What does that mean?
I believe it's where you try and establish like a society on the water, out in the ocean.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Like in international waters sort of thing.
Yeah. When you see on Water Rats or something, one of those like 90210 back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And you used to watch them go into the international waters and do the trades out there on the boats.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's what he was trying for, but maybe something a little bit more. What's that movie? I think it's got Bruce Willis in it.
Oh, yeah.
Waterworld.
You're talking about Waterworld. That's Kevin Costner, is it?
Kevin Costner. Could have been further off.
The smokers are the bad guy from.
That was a classic
from memory. Yeah.
So that's a seasteaded society.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a good way to frame. I think that's a good way to frame it up.
Okay. Look up.
And all they end up fighting over is oil, don't they?
Yeah, it's something like that. Far out. That's a long time ago.
So he and that wasn't going so well because I don't think he could get much buy-in to people wanting to play this particular game, or I'm not sure how good it was. But the idea behind that game was to I think it was to like teach people about libertarianism and libertarian views, and you kind of role playing in this game.
Right.
And that's quite important for kind of subsequent steps in the journey. But essentially he went through all these things, and there was many other little ideas and happenings along the way, and they all essentially failed. But he was trying, he was like just trying to find something that he could do and get his teeth stuck into. He eventually found it was a not-for-profit book company called Good Wagon Books, and they were an online bookseller. And I think he basically went in there, and they weren't the greatest at running operations for a business and other things. And, I think with his kind of analytical, process-orientated mind, he was able to go in there and kind of turn it around. But it wasn't quite fulfilling his mission. So this is where the side project was born. And the side project was basically an online marketplace where you could buy or sell anything, which is what we mentioned earlier.
Very libertarian.
Very libertarian.
The internet is a bit of a place where it is somewhat, it's so decentralized. It's by its nature is somewhat libertarian, right?
It's very true.
It's the Wild West.
I think I was going to say if you go back maybe 10, 15 years ago or something, it kind of felt like a Wild West to some degree. Like if you happen to like somehow stumble onto a website and accidentally click a wrong link or something, your whole computer just like might blow up, that's what it felt like.
Yeah. Yeah. And people didn't trust it, right? Like you would never put your credit card details or anything on the internet.
Yeah. Wow. That's a very good point. You'd always do like a phone, a phone in or something, or, mail order the money. Yeah. And
I saw an interesting meme the other day. It was kind of hit the nail on the head. It was like, it said, 1999, and it had like the mum telling the kid, don't trust anything on the internet. Don't give him your card details. And it's like fast forward to 2020, and the mum's like, Pirates Star 6 on Facebook said that, 5G is killing us, and it was created by Bill Gates or whatever. You got to read this.
5G caused COVID.
Yeah.
Isn't that the conspiracy?
Yeah, that's right. So I think how things have changed.
I was going to say, probably in a few years' time, mate, she'll be trading Bitcoins.
Yeah.
Or using, paying for her groceries with Bitcoins or something, or whatever the latest coin is. So we mentioned Bitcoins earlier, and this was one of the fundamental building blocks for the website, because Bitcoins, as long as you don't I put any of your identifying information with it, you're anonymous effectively. Do you know much about it, mate?
Not enough to explain it properly, but effectively, there's a way you can use it that makes you completely anonymous. That's pretty much all you need to know.
I think the only risk is when you there's a point at which you need, if you want to, exchange those Bitcoins for money, and that's where there can be like a security kind of flaw, because somebody needs to get that money, or something needs to get that money. But
effectively, it's the equivalent of cash. Past that point,
and it's very much like a distributed thing. So it's very libertarian in its in its founding. So he built the website using that as the means of transaction. This is very early on in the Bitcoin days, and he used it was built on the dark net, or the dark web, which is also this like anonymous type space. Again, don't know any of this stuff. And it was built on the Tor browser, which was kind of encrypts everything that happens on it.
Yeah, which I think is essentially what the dark web is, right? You have to kind of know where to click into, or password or whatever, to find these particular places, but then you can't be traced effectively.
But it's because of what it is, like, it mustn't be that hard, or there must be some really good like Google tutorials on it to get going, because I can't imagine some of the people that ended up using it couldn't be that sophisticated with their technology use.
I would have thought it's quite hard to set up, but to access, I imagine it must be quite easy.
There's probably consulting services offered to set up your Tor browser, and
I'm sure
account.
People were highly motivated to figure it out. Let's put it that way. Just for clarity, I've never used this stuff. Like these browsers, I think it's just a program on your computer though, right? Like anything, it's like Google Chrome, right, or something.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know.
Anonymous.
I've never used it.
Much more anonymous than Google. The opposite.
I don't know whether you need to like have a specific, like, I don't know if you can do it on Windows, or I just don't know.
Anyway.
I no idea. So the site, this project at the time was inspired by A Lodging of Wayfaring Men, which is very much a book about, I believe, a book about this seafaring idea, or setting up some sort of, recluse society where there's no rules and it's just everyone for their own. And Breaking Bad. He was like super motivated by, I always go to call him Heisenberg. I always go to call him Hal, because he's just Malcolm in the middle to me.
How good is he in that? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That is such a good show.
I still don't think that he topped his Malcolm in the Middle role, even after Breaking Bad.
He's a great actor to be able to play both those roles, isn't he?
Yeah, they're like at polar opposite ends of the scale.
I know, seriously.
And so there's something really important about that Breaking Bad reference, and we'll get to that later on. So he then spent, I think it was like the next 6 months, building out this site, or building out what he wanted to do to create here, this site, this marketplace. And whilst he was like trying to, develop that computer game back when he wasn't a great programmer by the sounds. Like the book portrays him as basically being very, very rudimentary in his understanding of, I don't know, programming stuff. Again, I'm not technically up with it here. And particularly from a security standpoint. And they almost seem like two mandatory requirements before you kind of move into this type of venture, if you will. And so eventually, after this 6-month period of, trying to scope out and find ways of doing things. And back then, like we have like, LinkedIn Learning, or we have Skillshare, or any of those many or YouTube, just to look up how to do basically anything if you want, or learn anything. Whereas back then, it certainly wasn't like that. He had to find people that he could talk to.
Yeah, it sounds like he kind of hacked it together, but I don't know how aware he was that his coding wasn't that good. I think he probably knew he was, but I think he felt like it was secure enough. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone ahead with it, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I know there was one particular like friend / tech mentor that he had, which I think he'd met at uni, or he'd met at one of the libertarian clubs or something. And he was able to like give him direction and stuff. But there was a point at which Ross was, because Ross wasn't revealing much about what he was actually creating. And there was a point in that cycle where the dude was like, "What are you doing? Like, what are you actually building here? I want to know. In fact, I'm not giving you any more advice unless you tell me." And so I think that kind of ceased the relationship at that point.
Fair enough. So a lot of this story revolves around, there's kind of interplay between him and his girlfriend as well, right? Yeah.
He had, I'm going to cross wires here of multiple narratives and biographies, but there was a main girlfriend that he had at the time, and she knew about what was going on. I think because she might have busted him one day, coding up something, and
she knew about
whatever
his
it was.
Drug stash too, from memory. But it's kind of interesting because I think that the author would have. It sounded like that she was a big source for this book. It sounded to me like a lot of the information came from interviewing her. That was my read on it when I read it. So,
like you mean,
did you get that
like
feeling?
Like
the
she was the source
into
for
Ross. She was a source for the book.
Oh, yeah. You're probably right, mate. To be honest, because I don't know where you get those stories otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
And although he did keep a diary, he did have like a journal that he kept a lot. It's like that. It's that classic. It's almost that story of hearing the big mastermind, and always keeping a journal about every single thought that he has. It's almost too good to be true. So. Yeah.
The book's written by Nick Bilton, by the way. I don't think we actually gave him any love at the start. So
no, we didn't. And it's an extremely well written book. I thought the narrative was excellent.
Oh my goodness, it's so good. It's edgy as seat stuff. Reading this book, isn't it?
He's actually, there's a book called Hatching Twitter that he's actually written as well, which I haven't read.
I've read that too. That's exciting as well. It's not quite as good as this one, but it's so interesting.
Hey, talking about Twitter, did you see that it got hacked or something the other day while we're talking about all this technology stuff? And actually this is very relevant. So I think it was yesterday even, or the day before, and what are we? We're kind of mid late July at the moment. So he, not sure when this episode will be released. That's a disclaimer, but if you're listening to this,
that out.
Yeah. So, not he. So Twitter, I was just thinking about Jack Dorsey. Yeah, he was like, this was a terrible, terrible day or something like that. He wrote after the day had finished. But basically, I think Twitter got hacked, and to the extent that there was a huge number of high-profile Twitter accounts. Like I'm talking Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and they're the only two that I can recall off the top of my head. But a lot of kind of verified celebrity status people. I think even like Kanye West was in there, maybe as one of the accounts, and with huge followings. And basically, they all put out and business as well. I think Spotify, for example, was hacked. Their verified account, and basically all put out this not the same but a similar type tweet where it was something about send your we're feeling generous or something, or we're in light of COVID we're feeling generous. If you send Bitcoins here, we will double them, and for like some charity donation or something like that.
Oh God.
And like it looks very sus, even just reading it, but I don't, and so I just wonder whether anyone who's got Bitcoins reading that would have actually donated, but apparently it did. And so obviously that's a huge breach for something like as influential as Twitter.
Unbelievable.
So I don't know what the outcomes will be of that, but yeah, I'm sure there'll be some sort of investigation. Anyway, back on track. So you mentioned the drug stash, Lockie.
Yeah. So he basically
he wasn't like a druggo as such, or he wasn't like a junkie as such. What do you mean by drug stash?
I don't think he really cared about drugs. He cared about the idea of a truly free market, and he wanted to create this thing for the world to show that he said, I'm creating an economic simulation to give people a first-hand experience of what it would be like to live in a world without the systemic use of force. So he's trying to build this thing to kind of show what it would be like to have a truly free market. But when he launched the site, he needed something to sell on it. So he basically started growing his own mushrooms.
Yeah, he like learned how, I don't know where he learned it, but I think there was like a forum or something. He found out how to grow. We're not talking about portobello mushrooms here. We're talking like magic mushrooms. And
fun kind.
And so he basically got to the point where he'd rented out some cheap warehouse, which is very Breaking Bad-esque as well, and started growing these like supposed very high quality mushrooms because he only wanted high quality stuff on his site.
So this was February 2011.
Yes, and I think there was actually there was nearly a point there along that journey where the whole entire thing could have been shut down because like the amount of mushrooms he was growing were, he was going to go to prison for a long, long time if he got busted with that. But I think what happened, there was like a big pipe leak or something one day, and basically I think his landlord came in or something and found out and said, I'm calling the cops. And so he had to like pull everything out of there as quick as possible and make a dash. But he made it.
Yeah. So that would have stopped quite quickly. I think he's starting to feel a bit stressed about doing that at this point. I think it's starting to kind of weigh on him a little, and being the nice suburban boy, but it's for this altruistic cause that he's doing. And he was about, by my calculations, 26, 27 at this point. And it seems he's going through that kind of phase where a super idealistic phase, but a slight rebellious phase too.
Yeah, correct, mate. So he originally kicked the site off, And, it's like a network, right? And so network effects apply, which means that the problem with networks is there's a sub threshold, or when you're below the threshold of users or people within or nodes within the network, it's useless or it doesn't do anything. So he needed an engine to kick it off, which was that mushroom farm. But that isn't enough, because you also need to get the word out there. You need people to come to actually purchase the products. So he went via this name or this alias called Altoid, and basically went around to, which I think was also the first name that he used as the administrator for. It was either that or it was admin. I can't recall on the site, and basically went around to some forums and posted, hey, have you heard about this? These are on pretty esoteric forums, by the way. Have you heard about this site? That you can get these really good mushrooms from, and sparked up the conversation there.
So this would have felt a bit exciting. He's trying to get this little website off the ground. He's trying to get some customers in the door, and it's kind of proving his point that, this thing can exist, and it's kind of this utopian market. And the way it actually worked was essentially you'd go on, it was like an eBay for whatever the hell you wanted almost, which seemed to get more extreme the longer it went on. But mainly for drugs. So you could go on and you could click around and say, oh, yes, I'd have heroin, please. And you click on and it would have reviews from users like you would on Amazon. And then you would buy it using your Bitcoin, and, however that transaction occurred through, the website, I don't know. But I assume it's a little bit more complicated than getting your PayPal account logged into. But anyhow, it was quite efficient, and then you'd get posted the product, essentially. It'd turn up in your mailbox.
In the mail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is where it was kind of grasped onto by some of the first. So obviously after the launch, eventually, the wheel got moving. The engine room started kicking off, and then because of the review system, it encouraged kind of good drug dealers to essentially come onto the platform, good air quotes, to try and sell their wares, which kind of got things going. Yeah.
So it kind of works like any other two-sided marketplace you can see on the internet now. But, it's a truly unique product. So it didn't take long before people were very interested in this. And when they realized it actually worked and it was anonymous, the floodgates opened.
That's it. And I think it's worthwhile, mate. Like we've mentioned, like Bitcoin and Tor and all this stuff. Like this is a pretty incredible feat going back, like a decade ago now, to put this together from someone who's not in that field, or hasn't had a professional life in software development or something,
Quite incredible. And so it's interesting. It's kind of that classic story of innovation, that it was the perfect time for it. You had these emerging technologies that allowed something like this to occur that could never have occurred previously at scale. Bitcoin, this really was a massive, which we can get into a bit later. It actually launched the growth of Bitcoin significantly, just this website, this kind of anonymous browsing, and then the internet itself, even the kind of FedEx style mail played a part too,
Fast deliveries, next day delivery.
So it was just the right time for Ross to come along.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question for you, mate. at what point, because he had good intentions, he had really, he wanted to do good, and the whole thing that he wanted to set out to achieve was, like create a world where, there wasn't shoot ups to, over buying and selling drugs, that it was a non-issue. It was something you could go to the store or whatever, to buy. I think the big kind of flagship mission was he wanted to change the world so much that him talking about the selling of drugs wasn't wasn't an offense, or wasn't something that you do, in trusted circles or something like that, And so at what point along his journey, mate, do you think that he lost way, or, that he kind of diverged too hard, that he became too idealistic, or, where do you think that happened?
I mean, don't really want to spoil too much of this, but it's hard to pick the exact point. I mean, there's a couple of really big flagstone moments where he clearly crosses a line. But I think that it depends what lens you look at this through. I mean, there could be some arguments that it did some good. Some people would probably argue. I think that it did more bad than good, personally. But in terms of his evolution, I think he just kind of spiraled into his own thoughts about it and justifications around it. And then when he created his alter ego, things really got going, I feel like maybe that's where it started to go wrong.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, I think from because it seemed, I don't want to say this, but to some degree there was it wasn't as harmful, and then things kind of progressed, and as you said, spiraled to some degree.
Yeah, it scaled quickly, and things got a bit out of control faster than he thought, and then he kind of became a hero, of this community, and then he started to let it get to his head. And I wonder what he thinks about it today. That's one of the questions I was left with.
Okay. Let's touch that later, because it's going to, because I reckon there's actually,
let's keep going.
Yeah. So shortly after, obviously, it started attracting some attention, and you start getting the DEA and there's all these other various characters involved in the story, have quite a prominent role in this case to try and find out and shut down this thing. But it was basically this elusive beast that you could never catch because of the anonymity that was built into the technology itself. It was
super solid,
yeah.
Full branches of these special agents trying to crack into this thing. Really watertight, even with Ross's shitty coding skill. But they didn't actually realise it was much of a thing for quite a while, until the agents started to pick up some weird stuff in the post. And it took a while for some people to convince others that this was actually a thing that should really be paid attention to. And in that time, he was able to build more of a team around him that plugged a lot of the holes in his own code base. Yeah.
Well, the FBI, mate, said that, so there was all these agencies, like the FBI eventually got involved, which meant that there was all these local police jurisdictions involved. There was the DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Agency in America, involved. Numerous different agencies. The IRS even got involved, which is equivalent of the Australian ATO. But the FBI said, the tax man So the Silk Road, this is what the FBI said, the Silk Road emerged as the most sophisticated and extensive criminal marketplace on the internet at the time, serving as a sprawling black market bazaar. Like, for the FBI to say that means that it must be just incredibly well put together. So just to emphasize that. But what I wanted to say here, mate, was that I was almost like flabbergasted, or to some degree like disgusted in just the bureaucracy that went on between all these different departments, which they go into in the story. It's totally
dysfunctional, yeah.
And like to the extent that there's all this like poaching of the crime. You know, it's like, I want this, we want this job. You know, no, we this job is ours. You know, and
it's like a TV. It's like on TV. You know.
Yeah, to be honest, like, it's a disgrace because it doesn't do any good. Yeah, maybe the only good it does is create a bit of like a competitiveness, you know, to try and solve the case. But there's no way overall that it can be good for the outcome to try and actually, like, what are we actually trying to do here?
Yeah, it's crazy. And yeah, a lot of people tried to crack this case.
Yeah. So I remember throughout it there was, so I think it was the Baltimore police jurisdiction were the ones that kind of originally started building this case up, and and being passionate, because there's one guy in there that was super passionate about it, and he just wanted to kind of solve this. And I remember like the Chicago police force coming in one day, and they came in with all their seniors, and they came in with like their chief attorney, and like you would for like a proper lawsuit or something, and basically tried to like jostle, strong arm the Baltimore police guys off the case and say, we're taking this on, this is ours, type thing. And you're just shocked. You're just like, why can't they work together? But I think the problem is much more structural than that, where it's the police, the agency that solves it gets the loot, gets the funding or whatever it is.
Seems to be institutionalized and something to do with incentives.
Yeah, correct, mate. But it just didn't sound like a good place to be. And there was a pretty like bad culture, not just within the individual departments themselves, but like as an overall kind of ecosystem. And eventually they kind of came together as a little bit more of a group, and you notice that's where some progress actually happens. And this is where you get the IRS and what they have working together with the FBI and all the other departments and starting to make progress. But it was just mind-blowing, mate. But it made me think about, so in the pursuit of trying to get this site and shut it down, there was two particular agents. One was called Carl and one was called Sean. And I think they were the two agents that they also had like aliases on the Silk Road, because this is some of the tactics they were employing to, try and catch it. But they decided, yeah.
But I think we'll get into this, but Ross had essentially a team that he'd chat with. And there's a lot of logs of him talking to people on the site. And I think one of these guys actually got into an admin position on the site at some point.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was Nub. I think that was the name of this guy, and he was like one of Ross's closest confidants. So very, yeah. But there's no way, it's quite interesting because they're like talking to one another, but there's no possible way for them to know who each other is. And, you know, I think Ross became quite paranoid. So because of how well the site or how successful the site was, meant that he needed to hire more and more people. And, you know, the revenue was skyrocketing and he had like a community of people, a huge marketplace to kind of deal with. And things moved very, very fast.
You could tell why this was such a interesting case for people is because I'm not sure in any other way has such a huge criminal enterprise kind of happened in broad daylight. So like, you know, if you had the right tools, you could go onto this site and just see this. It's like setting up a market in the middle of the town square and everyone going and buying illegal goods from it, but no one can do anything or see the people's faces that are buying the stuff or selling. It's quite unique in that way.
It is hugely unique. And not just that, mate, but it's not even maybe necessarily set up in the middle of the marketplace. It's the postman is dropping it off to you, you know?
Yeah.
The postman will give it to you. You don't even have to worry about going out. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So obviously during the explosion of the site, there was he was neglecting his real life, or his out of work life, I should say. And, you know, he obviously had a few different cover stories, and I think he had like a mix of cover stories, which I don't understand. I don't know why he just wouldn't have one cover story, but he liked to make things more stressful by the sounds. And you mentioned his partner, and I think they were going to get married or, you know, have kids, is what it sounded like. And she basically obviously had said that you need to part ways with it. So whatever happened, he obviously wasn't going to part ways with it, but he eventually told her that he did, and he got rid of it. And I think they moved apart to some degree because their relationship had distanced so much, but, you know, they were still very, very, you know, tight friends as a result. And at this point in time here, this is when Ross made a bigger move on the website itself, because he wanted to make it seem as though the entire website had, you know, changed hands, you know, just for like a trail of records and things. So this is where he created a new alias called Dread Pirate Roberts, DRP. So, scary. And so the DRP...
People loved it.
Yeah, people loved it. People lapped it up. And no one really knew if it was Ross or not, except for like there was one or two of the closest confidants, I think, that were in the mix that still knew it was the same person. Might have just been one, actually, which I think was that Variety Jones character.
Yeah, those two were the brothers in arms.
Yes. And so this character is inspired by the Princess Bridge, which is about, you know, basically this pirate who's feared across the seven seas for his ruthlessness, and who this pirate actually was actually a series of individuals. So it was never one person. So it kind of added to this elusiveness of the character itself.
Bitcoiny, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very anonymous. So, and this is when things started like inflecting hugely both for the business and then obviously for the trailblazers of the you know, various government agencies and international government agencies pursuing them. So, yeah.
I think it was the Princess Bride, actually.
Sorry, the Princess Bride. You're right. You are right. I don't know why. I've actually got Bridge written there. It should be Bride.
Oh, good. So, yeah, this is where he sort of took on this alter ego and became almost a fictional hero. He became a bit larger than life online, and he'd talk a lot about, in rhetoric, about his beliefs and why the site exists and this sort of stuff. People lapped it up. And he developed this kind of support network with the other person, Variety Jones, and, you know, they could bounce off one another. And he had kind of a partner, a business partner to effect.
Correct, mate. And, you know, these guys actually had no idea who they were, who each other was.
On purpose.
On purpose. And can you, like, what's also impressive about this is it sounded like a relatively, like, strong business as well, not just the technological aspect, but in terms of how the business was run. But he had no real business mentors. It was just this kind of esoteric group of confidants that he was able to talk with about how to fix or change things, you know. Whereas a lot of business owners and things have proper mentors. You know, even I mentioned Sudog earlier. He had so many mentors along the way to help him and guide him through.
It just would have been so difficult to have this secret.
Yeah, you know? The running of two stories, or in his case, probably more than that, because he overcomplicated it. So, you know, this is around getting into sort of 2013, a couple of years after launch. And it's really starting to build some momentum, huh? Yeah, this is also the point where it's, you know, it's almost getting reported on daily because, you know, there's either sadly some really bad cases. I think there's one in Western Australia of a high school boy who, you know, basically jumped off a balcony because of some synthetic drug from China. This is the real ugly side that you don't really kind of see at first glance, you know, thinking about that and the kind of the philosophy behind it. Not to mention all the other issues. And because it's starting to get hacked as well, you know. Yeah. It's what a great target to be for hackers, this kind of thing. Well, you've got the you know, some extremely esoteric technology working, and you've got, you know, probably all the people who have, you know, the most technical knowledge in that, probably trying to find a way into it and trying to pull out ways to get a hold of different bits of information, which was part of like the downfall of, you know, eventually when this collaboration of departments and things came together. So the first person, just quickly jumping through a few of these, you know, hard facts here, mate. The first person to become convicted of crimes was actually in Australia in February 2013, associated with Silk Road, which was a pretty big thing. I don't know how they did that. And 2013, you know, you mentioned that there was starting to be security flaws. I think there was this, what they call a DDoS attack, which I think is just sending endless requests to a website, and eventually you overload it. But I don't think you can normally sustain it for too long, whereas this was like a sustained DDoS attack, which sounded quite coordinated and whatever. But it only took it down briefly, and they were able to get it back going. By June 2013, I think there'd been an IP address leak. Which would make a lot of people nervous. Yeah. And so that IP leak came from like some minor update that was done on putting a captcha, you know, those things that you know, select the traffic lights or type in this word type thing to, you know, on websites when you sign up. It was because they'd implemented that and it left some breadcrumb or something, you know, along the way. And there was an IP address that basically linked the real server to Iceland. And so the FBI was able to get a hold of this, and they eventually got the server, which on its own merit wasn't enough, by the way. which is just super fascinating.
Yeah, it kind of decentralized it enough for that not to kind of hurt him too much.
Yeah.
But the strategy they actually used to catch him was quite interesting in the end.
Yeah. Do you remember Gary Alford, the IRS guy?
That's right. He's the real detail guy, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a guy that read things 3 times. Like everything he read 3 times.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing you'd imagine an IRS agent doing if he's in the IRS, very uniquely, probably you need to have that kind of personality to solve this case. I think you need to try and go through everything with such a fine-tooth comb that you can, but it needed kind of a combination of personalities. And that's why it probably took so long, is because no one from these different areas felt like working together.
Correct. They all had their own pieces of the story, mate. So like, I think it sounded like what the FBI had so eventually they got a hold of the Iceland company that was hosting the server, and, were able to get a hold of it and get the password from the Iceland company to get onto it. Right. Mm-hmm. But, which I think gave them the kind of the strongest bit of stuff. But the issue was, I don't think there was anything actually on the server that kind of linked it to who the owner was. And as soon the problem is, as soon as the FBI were to give away that they'd got a hold of the server, or that it was vulnerable, then obviously the people running it, being Ross in this case, would have just moved it somewhere else, or changed everything and moved somewhere else. So they couldn't kind of shut it down, But it just meant that they could kind of get deeper access into things. And this is incredible because there is millions of dollars going through the site almost on a daily basis, I think, by this point in time.
It is absolutely pumping. We'll get into a few of the stats towards the end, but this is a big business, a really big business, and there's a lot of money at stake. And Ross, by this stage, is a very rich man.
Yeah, mind you, he's still walking around in the same jeans that his girlfriend bought him like 2 years prior when they were first started dating. And, he hasn't changed the way he lives. He's living in a pretty basic apartment, not much in there except for his, computer. He was a pretty minimalist type guy. Mm. So the IRS agent that we mentioned, this is quite incredible. So he, in terms of like problem solving, he was, trying to put his frame of mind, put his perspective in that of other criminals from the past, like really kind of sophisticated criminals. And so there was a serial killer known as Uncle Sam, and basically this Uncle Sam guy would go to a crime scene. He would commit these murders, right? And he committed them all over the place and never left a trace of anything to do with identity, and no one was ever able to find out. There was no connection between the different types of murders he was committing, I don't think. So what they ended up doing was the people investigating thought, well, if you're kind of halfway through committing this act, you're not really going to go out and pay for extra parking midway through, after doing it. So they ended up looking at cars that had parking tickets in areas nearby to the crime at the time of the crime, and eventually kind of pinpointing one particular car that just had a couple in, a few of the different places. And they used that as like the trigger to go, well, let's just go check it out. And so basically, I think they knocked on the guy's door, who it was, and ready just to do some questioning. And he opens the door. He's like, "Took you long enough," or something like that. Just in this kind of psychotic manner.
Jeez.
But what it inspired this Gary Alford guy to do the same thing. And what he did is he kind of framed up, when was this first mentioned, on the internet? Because he thought that at some point in time it had to have been mentioned. And what he discovered was this esoteric forum, and found Altoid, the username used on this esoteric forum, right? And this is when you're like, whoa, because he wanted to find the original cases. And we haven't mentioned that there were so many suspects. Like, there'd been endless suspects of who would have possibly done this. And particularly people who are not of Ross's kind of character. People that are actually heavily involved in criminal organizations or have outspoken views and are in software for a start, to have done this. And they ended up going on this forum. I think he used his abilities at the IRS to ask for just the data on that particular user, right? And this was data from a couple of years prior, and in that account name, there was a deleted email address which had the name rossulbricht@gmail.com. It wasn't the actual email address, but it was like a deleted email address on this data, which was just so happened to still be on the database.
So they knew it was so early that he must be at least a suspect and likely involved.
That's it. But it was very much a case of,
wow.
Anyone could have, or except for seizing the data itself, anyone could have asked those questions to get to that end. And the thing is that I think Ross's name had actually popped up in another one of the departments or agencies, but it was essentially dismissed because they're like, definitely not the profile of our guy, and because they were turning up so many suspects, it was disregarded. So, long story short, mate, he was arrested in October 2013, and again, the bureaucracy just played right to the end, like right until the end, which is hilarious. So, the idea was they had to catch him on the computer and logged in to try and like really prove guilt.
There's no other way to really properly prove it, and he had like a bunch of getaway plans and things that he kind of, was ready to kind of pull the trigger on if he had to. So, where he could kind of wipe everything and this kind of stuff. So they really had to sort of be very
like
careful about how they caught him.
There was like a button on his computer that had been programmed that if he tapped it, everything just like encrypted or got wiped or whatever. So it was all set up, ready to go. But the local jurisdiction had to make the arrest, and they had in their mind that Ross was this, like big drug kingpin, because by this point in time, there'd been murders, there'd been guns and weapons and explosives and different things being sold, although it wasn't super successful. There wasn't a great deal sold, but there was still things sold. I think it was just getting going. And, obviously a increasingly huge drug trade that was being performed through the site. And so they had to get him on the computer logged in. And obviously if a SWAT team enters your house and you're the dread Pirate Roberts, what's the first thing you're going to do as soon as you hear that?
Hit the kill switch, baby.
Hit the special button. So I think it was Agent Tarbell at the FBI was like, we cannot let this happen. So basically they kind of like jumped ahead by a day had found out where Ross was hanging out for that day, which just happened to be in a library in San Francisco, and they'd kind of set up this ploy that they were going to do, where they had like some lady sit down opposite him in the library, and normally he was very suspect of anyone sitting near him, but she looked harmless. She was sitting on the opposite side of the table and whatever else. And I think they had two other agents go in and act like they were having a domestic fight in the library. And so one of them like punched the other in the jaw, and it was enough for Ross to kind of, Ross to like look over to his left or his right or something. Sorry for anyone that actually wants to read this. And the other one reached over, grabbed the laptop. So the lady that was sitting opposite grabbed the laptop, pulled it back off him. And as Ross had turned back around, he was like, tried to reach out to grab his laptop because he saw it going away. And then by that time, the other two agents had come over and got him. So, and they got him logged in, not just to the site, but into like two of the there was 2 levels deeper or something for the administrators. So they got the works.
Got him. So by this stage, in 2 years, the site was doing about $1.2 billion worth of revenue and producing profits of around $80 million.
That's big.
That's big. And there was an interesting effect because they were trading in Bitcoin on the site. Ross was collecting a heap of Bitcoin, and because more people wanted to use the Bitcoin, the price of the Bitcoin was going up. So he was kind of getting this double bounce from increasing the popularity of Bitcoin at the same time. And this was after he'd been hacked and all this stuff stolen from him. But you see this kind of dark progression of, okay, we'll sell some drug, we'll sell some mushrooms. Oh, we'll sell some cocaine. Yeah, well, heroin's on there now. Now there's weapons on there. Then he's getting enemies. Then he decides he wants to order hits and organizes a bunch of killings, none of which are believed to have actually taken place.
This is the thing with the killings, mate, is they were like traitors. So one of them was like his close confidants who actually somehow the FBI found this guy, or one of the agencies found this guy. And I think they essentially like tortured him and got some information out of him. And then one of the agents got a hold of his computer that I mentioned earlier, one of the corrupt cops who got a hold of his computer and stole a ton of these Bitcoins, like, a lot of money's worth of Bitcoins. And because this guy had not just got arrested, but he disappeared. So because he was arrested, but he had stolen millions of dollars in Bitcoins. That's where Ross was like, I need to punish him for punish him for this. And because of the characters that he was having around him as his closest confidants, including like the Hells Angels, for example, the advice wasn't probably the most lenient of advice. And so that was his initial kind of decision to, basically place a hit on this person. It's pretty scary.
Yeah, the quiet college kid, huh?
Mm.
So effectively, they shut it down once they caught him. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they what I read is they plugged a USB in, and it was able to capture all the main files. I don't know. I don't really understand again the technology, but basically they needed to plug something in so that they could try and download as much as they possibly could from the computer, so they could, one, attribute him to being that person, and two, get a deeper understanding and shut the actual site down. And they had all this special big semi-trailers set up out the front, or eventually set up out the front, full of FBI agents and things operating in it with special plugs and whatever to try and extract information from the computer. But I think now there's been, subsequently there was like technologies, kill switches again developed that any unknown thing that's plugged into your computer now will wipe the whole thing or encrypt the whole thing. So, and the thing about encrypting was that, with the right encryption, it would take the best computers in the world 100 years to try and crack the code or crack into just that file, for example. And they obviously didn't have that time.
Yeah. So what happened to him?
Well, he went through a trial, and the reason it's called the American Kingpin is because there's one special. Actually, just pull back slightly. They originally offered him, I think it was like 10 years, do 10 years in prison, but him and his lawyer thought that they could get off, because he didn't think that they knew so much about it, and they didn't think that they had already had the server, and he thought that some of his, kill switches and things would have prevented certain things happening, which didn't really work. And so, plus there was a number of, witnesses and things, and there was a number of testimonies come in from families that have died, that have had kids that have died and stuff, all the really sad realities of it all. And so they ended up, because he said, no, I'm not guilty. Yeah, I'm gonna fight this. Basically, the prosecution decided to make a real example of him. So they basically pushed for all these sentences, including sounded like the most reserved sentence for what's known as the Kingpin, or the Kingpin sentence, which is basically for the head mobster of, full-blown criminal organizations. And so they tried to get him on that.
It says something about our time that the greatest drug dealer in the last 20 years has been a kid with a laptop.
Mm.
So the power of technology.
Yeah. We watched Scarface the other day. I'll tell you what, he acts a lot different to that guy.
Yeah. So he ended up basically getting a sentence that will mean he'll never leave jail.
Yeah. I think it was multiple life sentences.
I don't know. It feels a bit harsh to me. Like,
yeah,
I'm not saying you necessarily should get out, but this is a real, life plus 40 years plus no parole. People, mass murderers get more leniency than that. But effectively, he probably was in some ways, I mean,
they couldn't actually connect
stuff.
Yeah, they couldn't actually connect any of those five hits that he'd ordered. But there was the intent there, which is the start. But also, they couldn't prove that actually any of those murders actually took place at all. But again, the anonymity was just made things just so difficult to prove stuff. So, but it sounds like he got scammed by the Hells Angels, and they just sent him photos of, because they had to send photos as evidence, and it sounds like he got scammed with other people. But yeah, he got some sentence about, no chance for parole, and it's like life plus 40 years was the eventual sentence. So, which at the moment he's currently sitting in US penitentiary in Tucson, Arizona. So
probably got COVID.
There's been multiple, maybe there's been multiple appeals, and to the highest level, because the case originally went to the highest, I think, to the Supreme Court in the States, if I'm not mistaken, and straight to there, and same with the appeals, but obviously the appeals have been denied. And Variety Jones, which is his sidekick, is still, I think they eventually caught him, it took like 5 more years or something for him to actually catch him. or get extradited to the States. And now I think he's now going under prosecution as we speak.
Jeez. It's
crazy.
It's full on, isn't it? So what a story. And the book really reads like a thriller. And I think read it, because even though you kind of know the story anyway, there's so much more to it, and it's just fascinating to see his evolution and how quickly this thing grew to be so huge.
Yeah. Well, mate, I knew that he had been arrested or whatever, going into the book. I knew that they'd busted him and it was a big case, but that didn't ruin any of the book for me. It was just it was really a great story, and it would be awesome. It'd be great to see him in something a little bit more legal.
Well, it comes down to, do you think, like he's obviously, did he get lucky, or is he a genuine entrepreneurial genius?
I think
we may not know. He's certainly a very intelligent person. It's interesting how that intelligence can kind of lead you to get stuck inside your own mind to justify things that are pretty far away from where you started.
Yeah, well, I think one of the big takeaways, mate, is it really is that importance of who you have around you, and who you hear advice from. Because, if you're sitting in a cone of silence about ideas and things, then how are you ever going to see maybe the other side, or see that you'd become completely deluded in the mission you're on?
You end up in an echo chamber of your own.
Correct, mate.
That's good. That's a really good point. But look,
and
this is one of the most incredible crime stories of our time. I did not realize how crazy it got until I read this book. What
do you think are like some of the big takeaways for you, mate, out of this one? Because I mean, we've touched on a lot of the narrative of this one, but we haven't dissected it as much. What do you think are some of the big takeaways?
I think that your ethics get chipped away at one small piece at a time is the big one. And I think we talked about this when we did Bad Blood too, that there isn't some great moment where you have to make a choice between the right and the wrong and you turn evil. It seems to be this slow atrophy in tiny steps. And if you don't stop it, you keep going down that road and you keep justifying it, and all of a sudden you're the Dread Pirate Roberts. But to me, he also kind of relished that too. So there was the power got to him a little too. So it's not quite as simple as that, I think, as perhaps was with Elizabeth Holmes. But that's the main thing for me, is just to see his kind of degradation and how he justified doing some pretty shitty things.
Yeah. Do you think it's like that slippery slope thing cropping up again?
And be careful of the things you do in the, in the, I'm using my air quotes again, for those listening.
That's had so many appearances this episode.
Now I've forgotten what I was going to say, but I think it was along the lines of, be aware of what you're going to do in the service of doing good,
Yeah. Well, there's been many causes in history, mate, of, seeking what is right, or seeking the better, or for the greater good. And turns out most of them that you hear about are actually pretty bad.
Well, the lessons from history quote was, nothing is surer than the people who are fighting for the change becoming the thing that they fought to change in the first place, paraphrasing. There's definitely a bit of that with old Ross. He became quite a an iron-fisted leader of this community.
Yeah, autocrat.
Yeah.
And he became like the opposite of what he was seeking to some degree, which is
although
super
his
fascinating.
System was still open, the way he kind of dealt with dissidents and stuff would be something I'm not sure he'd be too proud of. I'm fascinated to just understand his mindset. I'd love to see an interview with him a few years on, you know. What is he? I do wonder whether I'm sure he regrets being in jail, but he was, I can't help but think that he hasn't changed his mind around his love of libertarianism. Yeah.
Well, as you said, like, yeah, I'm sure he's sorry now. And there's a website called freeross.org, which has been set up by his family, you know, to try and get him out because of the harsh sentence. And this, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, there's some pretty big names on there. You know, I think Noam Chomsky says it's a shocking miscarriage of justice. You know, most people recognize Chomsky as being like an anarchist or anti-establishment-esque, although quite prominent, intelligent intellectual. So regardless of if you disagree with his perspectives. So it's no doubt he's sorry because of what his circumstances have now led to. But, you know, if he hadn't have been caught, he would still be doing his thing. You know?
I tend to agree. So, yeah. Do you have any final words for us around this book? I think we really just wanted to lay out the narrative in this one, and because it does kind of speak for itself in many ways. Yeah, I think you're right. The biggest one, as I said, mate, for me was definitely about, you know, the taking care about who you spend your time with and getting your ideas from, and make sure it's like a diversity of thought. I think that was the biggest one, because if you get trapped in that echo chamber, that's when problems arise, even no matter how altruistic the ambition is. And I think there's also something something about this kind of time in this adolescence, or he's not an adolescent, is he? But that time in your 20s or when you're a late teenager, it's an interesting time. I mean, reading Into the Wild is kind of quite fascinating too, about that guy's life and how he kind of had a different extreme sort of path. That there's something, this kind of call to adventure that can really derail you in that time, I think. Yeah. It's like, I wish he'd found a purpose or a mission that didn't lead him down that particular path, because he would have done some incredible stuff. And I don't know whether he's in the years that he's going to spend in prison now, presumably for the rest of his life, and he's 36, so there's a long time potentially. I wonder whether he'll be able to do much, you know, now. And it really is a wasted bit of, you know, talent and energy. Yeah. So, yeah, don't start a big drug marketplace is the do something else. Yeah, do something else. That's I think that was the lesson learned out of that one, mate. So I think that's a wrap. Thanks, mate. Awesome narrative. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, no worries. And don't forget, everyone that is still listening, you can find full video from our episodes on YouTube. So go check it out. Check it out. That's it. Thanks, mate. We'll see you next time.